I would describe my family background as a kind of respectable working class family from Peckham. When I was born, we were living in a council house in Cronin Road in Peckham, which sadly that community was demolished to make way for what became the notorious North Peckham estate. We lived there until 1963, very close-knit, loving sort of family. And then we moved into a council flat on Peckham Road. And that's more or less where I grew up in the 1960s and 1970s. And it was in the 1970s that I witnessed, as we all did in this country, a rise in the popularity of the National Front. And I shall never forget, sort of towards the end of the 1970s, the National Front marching down Peckham Road, and I could see them clearly from my bedroom window. And in fact, my sister took photographs, a couple of photographs that I kept to prove to people that, you know, the National Front did walk down Peckham Road. But the point I want to make is that they, as you can see from the photographs that my sister took, there's a lot of police officers. In fact, you can't see the National Front for police officers. So one then associated the police with the National Front, that the police were there to protect them, to protect these, you know, people that promoted hate in our community. And so it didn't surprise me then that coming from the kind of background that I came from, which was culturally diverse, I come from a biracial family, there was a lot of conflict between the police and young black people, particularly where I lived, so that the young black people, and indeed a lot of us young white people, perceived the police as the National Front. The tensions between the police and the black community really started to escalate at the end of the 1970s. There was no love lost between them. And police were, or some of them, were targeting young black people, particularly young black men, stopping and searching them for no good reason. And that, in fact, happened to me in 1980. I came out of my block of flats on Peckham Road, walked across the road, and a police car came storming down Peckham Road and stopped right where I was. 2 police officers jumped out and stopped and searched me. And it was one of the most humiliating, frightening experiences I've ever gone through, because my family, as I said earlier, were respectable people. We never got into trouble with the law. You know, we kept ourselves to ourselves. My parents were well respected on the Tenants Association, on my council estate. And I was a very quiet, at that time, a very quiet, introverted kid. So for that to happen to me, and people in the street staring at me as though I was some sort of criminal, made me feel very, very distressed and angry, and certainly just fueled my mistrust and dislike of police officers, which was a great shame. It didn't surprise me that a year later, 1981, we had the insurrections. That, you know, a lot of young black people and some young white people fought back against the police in Brixton, in other parts of the country. It was quite a traumatic kind of time for this country to have that battle going on the streets. But it was an explosion, if you like, of the pent-up feelings of young people in this country who were being targeted unfairly by police officers. And I witnessed some of that, because although most of the violence in my community occurred in Brixton, it did spill over to an extent into Peckham, to the point where I had to go and sort of meet my mother from work and bring her home early. We had to board up the shop in Rye Lane, Peckham. We were advised to stay in the flat because we were on the main road. And we didn't see much violence, but we did see the kind of tail end of it. Growing up as a young man in the 1980s and being aware of the tensions between the black community and the police, I became aware of the tensions between the gay community and the police by reading what was being reported in the gay newspapers and gay magazines, and finding pamphlets like the Attacks on Gay People, which was published in 1980 by the Campaign for Homosexual Equality. And that was something that was always on my mind, but I never really acted on it until much later, when I became a community representative on the Southwark Police and Community Consultative Group. I joined that group in 1994. It took a while to feel at ease with the people in the group, both the senior police officers and the community representatives. So I never came out as gay straight away in that forum until the summer of 1994, when the violence that was directed towards the lesbians and gays who attended that summer's Pride Festival in Brixton was kind of splashed across the gay media. And I thought to myself, I can't keep quiet about this any longer. So that summer I came out as gay in this big forum. Didn't know what was going to happen. I'm not a political activist. I'm not from a political background. So I did it just as a member of the gay community who wanted to have a voice. And to cut a very long story short, what was born out of that coming out statement was the Southwark Anti-Homophobic Forum, and I'm very proud to have been really recognised as the person who was instrumental in getting that forum off the ground. There was a team of people that became involved, but it was because I spoke out about the violence against the lesbian and gay community in this forum that it was taken on board, and we had a public meeting in May 1995 and our first meeting in September that year, and that really was a big turning point for me. I think it's important to also state that another thing that motivated me to work as an advisor, if you like, a community advisor to the police, and to try and address homophobic violence in my community, was the fact that I was bullied at school for being gay. I kept quiet about that all those years, but I realise now in retrospect that it was because I was the victim of homophobic bullying at the secondary school that I went to in South East London, and being isolated and not being able to ask for help, not being able to go to anyone for support, totally isolated. It was a really horrendous experiences which I wouldn't wish on anybody. So really, in a way, the work that I've done with the Anti-Homophobic Forum, which has been a very proactive multi-agency forum, bringing together the council, the police and the LGBT community, has been really quite extraordinary. I remember very early on the senior police officers who were in the police consultative group were very supportive and encouraging, and in fact when I was photographed with them in 1995, right at the very beginning of this kind of work, the picture ended up in a gay newspaper called the Gay Gazette, and of course, being a gay newspaper, they had to put a really embarrassing headline called, you know, something about getting into bed with the boys in blue. But it was a very serious, worthy article, but I thought, trust the gay press to try and sort of, you know, do a jokey thing with it, but that's fine. But it was nowhere near as funny as the terrible jumper that I was wearing and looking so demure, looking like Audrey Hepburn, or trying to look like Audrey Hepburn on the cover of Picture Goer. I mean, when you see that picture now, it is embarrassing, but the serious side is that the work was very important.